Welcome to The Unspoken Truth. I'm your host, Rob Russ.
And live from Minnesota, I'm Edward Anderson.
How we doing today, Ed?
Living the dream, Robbie. How about you?
Yeah, I'm really well, man. Hey, it's been a busy week in the news and the NATO Summit has come to an end. In this video, we're going to talk about that. We're going to share our thoughts about what's going on with Zelensky, what's happening with the war. And one of the really telling things that I've noticed in the last week is that Zelensky seems to have gone from hero to zero. There's a whole lot of memes floating around about him, and there's some barbarous comments being traded between world leaders and the Ukrainians, which is unhelpful to be doing that in the public sphere, but Zelensky kind of started it. So what did you think was going to actually happen? And it seems like there's maybe some cracks or maybe some little fissures that are appearing there in the alliance. Everybody tries to put on a brave front and come together like we're all in this together. But the reality is, if the NATO alliance stops supporting Zelensky, all of this is going to go away. So there's a couple of questions there. Will the security guarantee help the Ukrainians, and will NATO help shorten this war, or is it going to be prolonged? And will the extra ammunition being promised to them actually make any difference as well? Now, we also know that the cluster munitions seem to be in Ukraine already. So we're hearing these announcements that, yeah, we're going to give you cluster munitions, yeah, we're going to give you F-16s, we're going to do all these things, but they're announcing that whilst already having had that in country. So they're getting everything lined up, and now they're making a public announcement about that. But it's a hell of a week, Ed. What's your view on it so far, mate? What do you think?
Yeah, well, I think one of Zelensky's biggest enemies is actually the 24-hour news cycle.
Yeah, it definitely is.
Yeah. I think that people are starting to get bored of it. They're starting to get tired of it. They're starting to say, all right, enough already. There are other things going on in the world for me to worry about. And, this is kind of human nature, right? This has been going on for, well over a year. How long has it been? Like, is it 2 years? It's
500 plus days.
Okay, so it's just getting, I think a lot of people are just getting tired. And I think, so Zelensky, I think, he's a victim of that. It's hard to keep people's enthusiasm and attention up for too terribly long.
It's hard to keep people's attention for more than 59 seconds on social media.
Yeah, tell me about it. Yeah. I think, and that's dangerous, because that could make him desperate to do, spectacular things in order to keep people interested, right? And that's dangerous.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with that. Well, you've got a little report for us, so let's take a look at that.
Did Zelensky just go from hero to zero? And if so, is that a good thing? All right, so let's talk about it. So a couple of days ago, NATO had a very important meeting in Vilnius, Lithuania. And the marquee topic of this conference was whether or not to bring Ukraine into the NATO alliance. So let's go to an article out of Zero Hedge to kind of summarize what happened. War effort in shambles as hawks turn on each other at NATO Summit. Bloomberg is just out with a devastating behind-the-scenes account of a hot-headed Zelensky at the NATO summit in Vilnius and the growing Western backlash in the face of his obvious frustration of what's being seen as ingratitude for the steady flow of billions of dollars in arms to Kyiv. Apparently, even the mainstream media agrees with our own assessment of the Ukrainian leader having thrown a tantrum as he complained about the weak and absurd NATO stance on Ukraine's membership. The blistering tweet he issued in English while en route to Lithuania exposed cracks in the alliance. Zelensky was running hot ahead of his sit-down with NATO leaders on Tuesday evening. The Ukrainian president had been angered earlier in the day by what he said was an absurd reluctance to give his country a clear timeline on membership. That outburst, in turn, riled the partners who have funneled billions of dollars of weaponry and aid into Ukraine's defense against the Russian invasion. The U.S. had been given no warning before Zelensky unleashed his attack on social media. All right, and that brings us to this photo. Does that picture not tell it all? So that picture kind of tells a story, doesn't it, if you look at it? It gives you the image of the nerd being invited to the cool kids party just so they can make fun of him. So there he is, standing in a corner all by himself, hoping that somebody notices him, hoping that somebody comes up and talks to him. One picture is worth 1,000 words, right? Embarrassed man could have sworn invitation said costume party. All day Wednesday, the above very real photo of an isolated, defeated-looking Zelensky standing amid NATO heads of state with backs turned, and things were even more tense behind the scenes. Over dinner in Vilnius with President Joe Biden back at his hotel, the other leaders delivered a clear message to Zelensky, according to one person who was present. You have to cool down and look at the full package, Zelensky was told. While it's not quite yet a full-on hero to zero story, things are certainly sliding in that direction, given it's unprecedented that the Ukrainian president, who previously enjoyed rock star status in Western capitals since the start of the invasion, could be told to basically cool it. NATO essentially told Zelensky, yeah, we would love to have you inside of the club, and we will bring you inside of the club, just not yet. The first thing that has to happen is you have to end the war. And basically what they're telling him is, listen, you got to be a little bit nicer, man. We've already given you billions of dollars worth of munitions and aid, and you want us to give you more. So you know what? You need to start showing a little bit of gratitude and a little bit of grace. So if I'm in Zelensky's shoes, I'm starting to wonder just what the commitment is from the West, to my cause. I remember it wasn't very long ago where Joe Biden was saying, whatever it takes. But the cold reality is this war is becoming more and more unpopular with the masses. And the one thing that politicians are good at is keeping track of unpopular issues. Now, this is why I personally think that this is a good thing. In my humble opinion, Ukraine cannot win this war. And the longer it goes on, the more people are going to die. Nothing good can come of this as long as the bullets are flying. And the sooner that Zelensky can see that the writing is on the wall, the sooner he'll probably negotiate a peace. Remember, they did actually have a peace agreement over a year ago, but the kibosh was put on that essentially by the West, particularly America. I'll just go ahead and say it. This war is not about borders. It's not about democracy. It's about money. And the tragedy is poor people are losing their lives for the sake of that. This war should end, and Zelensky should be looking for a way to get to the closest negotiating table he can find. So maybe this little snub, which really wasn't a snub, but he perceives it that way, might help him find his way to that negotiating table. And that's my commentary for the day.
Alrighty, I can see a change of attitude in the American voice there. I can tell that you're a little bit war weary. I think people's attention span for this thing has gone away, and it's I think it's played out by the very fact that people are making memes of Zelensky now as well. They're mucking around. He's the uncool kid, the nerd at the cool kids party. He wasn't there. You have to be 5'5" at least to start World War III. People horsing around with this. If you rewind the clock a year ago, no one would even contemplate doing something like that. But I think you're quite right when you say that people are a little bit sick of it because it's not our war. Here in Australia, there's been huge backlash, massive backlash. We just gave them 30 new vehicles that are worth X amount of dollars. And when you look at that on Twitter, there are literally hundreds of comments on all of these tweets. And then when people retweet the initial post of Australia's giving 30 Bushmaster vehicles to Ukraine, everyone's like, in the scheme of things, it's not very big, right? It's not a big commitment, but it's something. But everyone's like, well, what about cost of living here? What about interest rates here? What about keeping money here in Australia? Why are you supporting a war over there? I don't support that. I didn't vote for that. I didn't do that. And people are really turning against it. And just there's a little bit of heat in the conversation as well that I've noticed. And that's what you're seeing from that Zero Hedge article. And what are your thoughts on that, Ed?
Well, yeah, I can't say it too much better than that. I think I just think the world is kind of had enough. They're kind of like, well, so what? I got bigger fish to fry. I got, why should we care, Mr. Zelensky? Please tell us why we should care.
Oh, they're fighting for us, though.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That's right. That's a big picture. Right? Now, I've never been a fan of this war. I was against this war long before it was popular to be against it. Now it's starting to become popular to be against it. And that's a problem for Zelensky. Listen, there was a peace treaty on the table over a year ago. And Zelensky, it was all initial, but well, maybe not fully signed, fully adopted, but it was agreed to. Okay, but Zelensky turned away from it largely at the bidding of America. we're the ones that said, you know what, Nat, you know what, we need you to be fighting Putin. We need you all to fight in the front lines. So in a way, I can kind of see, I can see why Zelensky might be a little miffed. He's, hey, man, you told me you would have my back. You told me whatever it takes. Joe Biden was Kyiv saying whatever it takes. So I walked away from a peace agreement because you told me you had my back. And now it looks like maybe you don't have my back. I can see why he could feel a little played in all this.
Yeah, definitely. I agree.
But in the end, what's in it for any of us? Please, somebody tell me what's in it for us. Don't tell me it's about democracy. It's not freaking about democracy. If you're worried about democracy, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit out there in the world to go and pursue. But it's not about democracy. It's not about borders. This is about money.
You started off earlier today by saying you wanted to talk about this topic, and I said, what are the main points? And you said, hero to zero. Will the security guarantee help? Will NATO help shorten the war? Will the extra ammo help? Will the extra ammo help? Yes. Will NATO help shorten the war? No, they're prolonging the war. Will the security guarantee help? Yes, but it prolongs the war. So there's no clear defined outcome. And the really strange, ambiguous thing that they say is that if you ask any world leader that's supporting this war, what is the end state? They'll say the end state has to be determined by the Ukrainians. But it seems increasingly likely that the end state's going to be determined by NATO, because Russia by proxy, have won this war. And, I don't want to say the quiet part out loud, but I'll say it, and you've said it as well. And that's because if we stop supplying them with weapon systems, the Russians will roll them up. It might not be overnight, it might not be tomorrow or in the next 6 months, but eventually they'll roll them up, because the war of attrition is such that the Russians will just keep throwing their inventory at it and their soldiers at it, and they will eventually win. So will the extra ammunition that we've got make a difference? Well, maybe the cluster ammunition that we send to them will help, because it'll help break through the lines in the south, and then they can get going with their assault, cut the Russians in half, and then take back Crimea. But really, man, it seems like such a big thing to be doing, and such a big thing to be saying. They don't have the forces that we think that they have, or that the mainstream media will lead you to believe. And even though they're making significant progress in the counteroffensive, it's not really going the way that everyone anticipated, because it was this big giant build-up. And my fear is right squarely with you, Ed, where you said, because support for the war is going away, mainstream media are tired of it, which means by association, everybody else is tired of it as well. And everyone else is pissed off that we're giving all of our treasure to them. For what? What do we get out of it? Nothing. It's not an investment. We're not getting anything out of it. So my worry is that he'll do something stupid, like blow up a power plant. Just saying, who blew up the dam? I don't know. Everyone claims the Russians did, but then all the Russians claim that the Ukrainians did, but no one will come out and say who blew up Nord Stream. Like, if the support is going away, the only choice that Zelensky has is to draw NATO into the war some way or another. If he's not going to win, he's going to be increasingly desperate, and that desperation is going to cause something very, very different to happen. So I think you bang on when you talk about that as well, Ed. And the barbs that have been traded, Ben Wallace came out and said, we're not Amazon. We're not the Amazon of weapons, and we're not doing that. But yeah, I think that he encapsulated the feeling of his constituents when he said that. Yeah. What do you reckon?
Yeah, 4 months ago, he was all for backing Zelensky. Zelensky was a hero to this guy.
We're giving you Storm Shadow missiles. We're training your troops. We're doing and now he's saying that.
This guy is just a typical, vanilla envelope politician.
Well, he's reading the room correctly, isn't he? Exactly. When he's saying that.
Exactly. So,
I think the classic mistake in leadership that Zelensky has made is that you never berate someone in public. If someone's done the wrong thing, you never tell them that they've done the wrong thing in front of everybody. And when Zelensky came out on Twitter and said, this is absurd, why is it taking so long? We're fighting on your behalf, and all the carry on, he could have said that behind closed doors and none of this would have happened, and it would have looked like a unified front. But because he's a bit hot-headed and he's a bit frustrated by everything that's going on, he feels the need to put it out there to try and drum up support, but without realizing it has the opposite effect. Well, and most people can't see the second and third order effects of what it is that they're doing, and Zelensky's exactly the same as everyone else.
Well, we don't know, of course, but maybe he did try the backdoor diplomacy stuff first. Maybe he was saying the stuff behind closed doors, and he wasn't getting the answer he wanted. So maybe he feels that this is an effective run around. I'll go straight to the people and get them riled up, and they will force politicians. I don't know. Who knows what the guy's thinking? It appears,
but it backfired because we ended up here in a meme.
Yeah, well, everything is a calculated risk, right? You can't get everything right? So you got to come a little slack that way. I don't know. And I'm sure he's wearing his overalls there because some brilliant, Madison Avenue PR guy told him it was a smart thing to do.
Dumb. All right, let's round it out with some Ukrainian propaganda, or the Ukrainian version of what happened in the summit. And really what this is a summary from their perspective, and they're spinning it in a positive light, which they would always do. They're not going to talk about Ben Wallace, Trade and Barbs, and other people saying things about it as well publicly, because that's not in their support. If you just look at the bold there, you can see the first point: Ukraine's membership in NATO is only a matter of time. So this is what the Ukrainian government is saying, and Moscow will not be able to prevent it. The next one is that the whole summit, the Vilnius summit, has accelerated the path to the alliance. The third point is NATO is not tired of it, and we're interested in a victory, and we want to continue this. And I think that they tried to put a guarantee in place. So I saw a report saying that it doesn't matter if there's a change of government in the United States, the US will continue to support them because it's coming from NATO. It's not coming from the US, but the US could just cut them off like that. So I think that's a bit of bullshit, and that's a bit of propaganda there as well. And they've kind of given a guarantee that they're going to continue to support them, and they're going to up the output of their weapon production in Europe so they can continue to support the Ukrainians. So Kyiv is interested in building a bilateral relationship with NATO, etc., etc. And Ukraine is ready to immediately engage in the implementation of the necessary measures to fulfill the conditions of the alliance before the next summit in Washington next year. So they're going to tick all the boxes, but NATO made it really easy for them because, first of all, you need the map. You need to actually do all of the things politically and with your infrastructure of your country to be able to join. And then you need to be interoperable with the NATO military system, but they've dispensed with the map. So the interoperability question is the only one that has to be complied with. And because NATO are supplying all of the equipment, it's already there. So it's a little bit of a rubber stamp of what's going on. In my view, Ukraine is already in NATO, albeit barring the security guarantee, the Article 5 security guarantee, because when they put their hand up and they ask for what they want, meaning we need long-range missiles, we need cluster munitions, we need fighter jets, NATO are like, yeah, right, okay, cool, we'll get that to you. And as long as that takes, it takes, but they're still getting them. And there was a bunch of red lines. Biden said at the start of this conflict, we're never going to give them tanks. We're never going to give them jets. We're never going to give them missiles. We're never going to give them, and all of that is just complete bullshit. So whatever you're seeing on the front end of it, it's almost like you could think the opposite, right? So they're saying that, no, there's no timeline. Yes, there's a timeline behind closed doors. No, you're not going to join. Yes, you'll join. So no, I don't know. Maybe I'm a bit cynical about this and a bit weary of this news cycle. What do you think?
Ukraine will never be a part of NATO.
Big call. You're calling it.
I'm calling it.
You're calling it. Well, there's precedent, isn't there? And we've talked about that before of the Minsk agreement where, Ukraine will never be part of NATO. We're not going to encroach any further to the east. And the Russians are like, okay, cool. All right, that sounds good to me. That's fine. And the Russians go away in good faith and believe that negotiation. They sign documents and it's all this big public thing. But it's now come out that was complete garbage. And Angela Merkel even came out and said, yeah, we just did that to buy time. And we did that. So in 2014, they took back Crimea. We're going to arm them. We're going to train them. We're going to bring them into NATO. All of it's bullshit. So it could be bullshit saying to NATO as well that, hey, we're going to bring you into this alliance. You're going to be part of it. They can find whatever excuse they want to walk away from that.
Yeah, in geopolitics, it's always about location, right? Now, the people in the NATO alliance, they're in the alliance because of where they are. It's smart to be part of that alliance. Well, it just so happens that Ukraine happens to be in a unique location. They act as the buffer, and it's a big buffer. Ukraine is the largest country in Europe by landmass in Europe, and which is a good thing. So they act as a buffer between NATO and Russia. So they serve an important strategic purpose in that regard. Okay, so if they were to join NATO, now NATO will be on the border of Russia, and there's no buffer there. So strategically, you want it to be a buffer. So that's why I don't think there will ever be a part of NATO for that purpose, and that's a good thing. So it's good that they're not a part of NATO.
Yeah, it's easy for you and me to sit back here as armchair wannabe commentators and armchair generals saying that this is what should happen. But the reality on the ground is very different. There's Russians dying, there's Ukrainians dying every day. Another country invaded another country. It's a horrible circumstance, and war is just a complete and total absolute failure of humanity. And the thing that really riles me up about it is it's just because people can't talk to each other. You know, two old men can't get together and figure out their differences and sort that out, and they have to resort to picking up weapons and doing something about it. That just seems so old-fashioned, and it just highlights to me that the old people that actually run the world have they don't care about regular, normal people, because the immense suffering that has been caused as a result of this conflict is unbelievable. I'll close out by saying this. I watched an investigative report yesterday. Not really investigative. It kind of was, because the reporter went to the front, but he wasn't allowed there, so he came back from the front, and he went to the place where the soldiers came to after they'd been given a little bit of leave. So you go to the front for a couple of weeks and then go and have a couple of weeks off and then come back. And there was this Irish guy, and he was packing his stuff, and the reporter's like, "What are you doing, man?" And he goes, "I'm getting the hell out of here." And he's like, "Why? What's wrong?" And he'd been there for, I think, for 5 or 6 months or something like that. But he'd been on the front, and he's like, "Yesterday I was at the front, and well, what's it like?" And he said, "It's hell. It's hell on earth." He goes, "There's dead Russians everywhere. There's dead Ukrainians everywhere. You're under fire constantly. We don't have enough of anything. They don't have enough of anything. It's absolutely horrible. I'm trying to get the hell out of here." And he was packing his stuff and he was leaving with his mates. And he was a foreign fighter, right? So he was an Irish guy. He'd obviously served in the military before, and he was an infantry guy, and he was getting out of there. And I was thinking about that yesterday after I watched it. I only went for sort of 5 minutes or something. It was pretty short. But it got to me, and I thought to myself, I look at this every single day, and I think, you know, you see these dead Russians in these trenches. You see Ukrainians dropping hand grenades on people from drones from 1,000 feet in the air, and it's just an absolute failure of humanity. And this needs to stop. It needs to stop. And all because two people can't talk to each other, it won't stop. And there's just old men that are running this, and it's a tragedy, man. It's an absolute tragedy.
I can't do better than that. That's well said.
Well said. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's wrap this one up. We've got another video coming up right here.